to Rudolf Carnap, one of my favorite philosophers, but anyone who knows Carnap's work is completely implausible he would ever say anything so frivolous. It's also been attributed to my thesis advisor, Doug Hofstadter, author of Gödel Bach, and a big fan of the meta perspective, but he assures me he never said it either. But the meta perspective on anything is stepping up a level. The meta problem, as I think about it, it's called the meta problem because it's a problem about a problem. A meta theory is a theory about a theory. The meta problem is a problem about a problem. In particular, it's the problem of explaining why we think there is a problem about consciousness. So there's a first order problem, the problem of consciousness. Today I'm going to focus on a problem about it, but I'll start by introducing the first order problem itself. The first order problem is what we call the hard problem of consciousness. It's a problem of explaining why and how physical processes should give rise to conscious experience. You've got all these neurons firing in your brain, bringing about all kinds of sophisticated behavior. We can get a beat on explaining our various responses, but there's this big question about how it feels from the first person point of view. That's the subjective experience. I like this illustration of the hard problem of consciousness. It seems to show someone's hair catching fire, but I guess it's a metaphorical illustration of the subjective perspective. So the hard problem is concerned with what philosophers call phenomenal consciousness. The word consciousness is ambiguous a thousand ways, but phenomenal consciousness is what it's like to be a subject from the first person point of view. So a system is phenomenally conscious if there's something it's like to be it. A mental state is phenomenally conscious if there's something it's like to be in it. So the thought is, there are some systems, so there's something it's like to be that system. There's something it's like to be me. I presume there's something it's like to be you. But presumably there's nothing it's like to be this lectern. As far as we know, the lectern does not have a first-person perspective. This phrase was made famous by my colleague Tom Nagel at NYU, who back in 1974 wrote an article called What is it like to be a bat? And the general idea was, well, it's very hard to know what it's like to be a bat from the third-person point of view, just looking at it as a human who has different kinds of experience. But presumably, very plausibly, there is something it's like to be a bat. The bat is conscious, it's having subjective experiences, just of a kind very different from ours. In human subjective experience, consciousness divides into any number of different kinds or aspects, like different tracks of the inner movie of consciousness. We have visual experiences, like the experience of, say, these colors, blue and red and green from the first person point of view and of depth. There are sensory experiences, like the experience of my voice, experiences of taste and smell. There are experiences of your body, feeling pain or orgasms or hunger or a tickle or something. They all have some distinctive first person quality. Mental images, like recall visual images. Emotional experiences, like experience of happiness or anger. And indeed, we all seem to have this stream of a current thought, or at the very least, we're kind of chattering away to ourselves and reflecting and deciding. All of these are aspects of subjective experience, things we experience from the first person point of view. And I think these subjective experiences are, at least on the face of it, data for the science of consciousness to explain. These are just facts about us. We're having these subjective experiences. If we ignore them, we're ignoring the data. So if you catalog the data that, say, the science of consciousness needs to explain, there are certainly facts about our behavior and how we respond in situations, or facts about how our brain is working. There are also facts about how subjective experience is, and on the face of it, they're data. And it's these data that pose what I call the hard problem of consciousness. But this gets contrasted with the easy problems, the so-called easy problems of consciousness, which are the problems of explaining behavioral and cognitive functions. Objective things you can measure from the third-person point of view, typically tied to behavior, perceptual discrimination, say, of a stimulus. Control my behavior, walk towards the red one rather than the green one. I can report it, say that's red, and so on. Those are all data too for science to explain, but we've got a beat on how to explain those. They don't seem to pose as big a problem. Why? We explain those easy problems by finding a mechanism, typically a neural or a computational mechanism, that performs the relevant function to explain. So there's an actual process in my brain that leads to that behavior. Find the right mechanism that performs the function. You've explained what needs to be explained with the easy problems of consciousness. But for the hard problem, for subjective experience, it's just not clear that this standard method works. It looks like explaining all that behavior still leaves open a further question. Why does all that give you subjective experience? Explain the reacting, the responding, the controlling, the reporting, and so on. It still leaves open the question, why does all that accompany by subjective experience? Why doesn't it go on in the dark, without consciousness, so to speak? There seems to be what the philosopher Joel Levine has called a gap here, an explanatory gap between physical processes and subjective experience. At least our standard kinds of explanation, which work really well for the easy problems of behavior and so on, don't obviously give you a connection to the subjective aspects of experience. And there's been a vast amount of discussion of these things over, for centuries really, but it's been particularly active in recent decades. Philosophers, scientists, all kinds of different views. Philosophically, you can divide approaches to the hard problem into at least two classes. One is an approach on which consciousness is taken to be somehow irreducible and primitive. We can't explain it in more basic physical terms, so we take it as a kind of primitive, and that might lead to dualist theories of consciousness, where consciousness is somehow separate from and interacts with the brain. Recently, very popular has been the class of panpsychist theories of consciousness. I know Galen Strawson was here a while back talking. He very much favors panpsychist theories where consciousness is something basic in the universe underlying matter. Indeed, there are idealist theories where consciousness underlies the whole universe. So these are all extremely speculative, but interesting views that I've explored myself. There are also reductionist theories of consciousness, from functionalist approaches where consciousness is just basically taken to be a giant algorithm or computation. Biological approaches to consciousness. My colleague Ned Block was here, I know, talking about neurobiology-based approaches where it's not the algorithm that matters, but the biology that's implemented in, and indeed the kinds of quantum approaches that people like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff have made famous. I think there's an interesting thing to say about all of these approaches. I think that right leave a gasp, but the non-reductionist approaches have other problems in seeing how it all works. Today, I'm going to take a different kind of approach, this approach through the meta problem. One way to motivate this is to often get asked, well, okay, you're a philosopher, it's fine, you get to think about these things like the hard problem of consciousness. How can I, as a scientist or an engineer, AI researcher, how can I do something to kind of to contribute to help get at this hard problem of consciousness? Is this just a problem for philosophy? I mean, for me to work on it, say, as an AI researcher, I need something I can operationalize, something I can work with and try to program. And as it stands, it's just not clear how to do that with the hard problem. I mean, if you're a neuroscientist, there are some things you can do. You can say work with humans and look at their brains and look for the neural correlates of consciousness, the bits of the brain that go along with being conscious, because at least with humans, we can take as a background assumption, a plausible background assumption that the system is conscious. For AI, we can't even do that. We don't know which AI systems we're working with are conscious. We need some operational criteria. In AI, we mostly work on modeling things like behavior and objective functioning. For consciousness, those are the easy problems. So how does someone coming from this perspective make a connection to the hard problem of consciousness? Well, one approach is to work on certain problems among the easy problems of behavior that shed particular light on the hard problem, and that's going to be the approach that I look at today. So the key idea here is there are certain behavioral functions that seem to have a particularly close relation to the hard problem of consciousness. In particular, we say things about consciousness. We make what philosophers call phenomenal reports, verbal reports of conscious experiences. So I'll say things like, I'm conscious, I'm feeling pain right now, and so on. Maybe the consciousness and the pain are subjective experiences, but the reports, the utterances, I am conscious, well, that's a bit of behavior. In principle, explaining those is among the easy problems. It's subjectively measurable response. We can find a mechanism in the brain that produces it. And among our phenomenal there seems to be really widespread among, especially among philosophers and scientists thinking about these things, but furthermore, to say it's fairly easy to find a very wide class of people who think about consciousness. People say things like there is a problem of consciousness, a hard problem. On the face of it, explaining behavior doesn't explain consciousness. Consciousness seems non-physical. How do you ever explain the subjective experience of rest? And so on. It's an objective fact about us, just about some of us, that we make those reports, and that's a fact about human behavior. So the meta problem of consciousness, then, in a second approximation, is roughly the problem of explaining these problem reports, explaining, you might say, the conviction that we're conscious and that consciousness is puzzle. And what's nice about this is that although the hard problem is this, very, very about subjective experience, it's hard to pin down, this is a puzzle ultimately about sciences. So there's a research program. There's a research program here. So I like to think of the meta problem as something that can play that role I talked about earlier. If you say an AI researcher thinking about this, the meta problem is an easy problem, a problem about behavior that's closely tied to the hard problem. So it's something you might be able to make some progress on using standard methods of thinking about algorithms and computations, or thinking about brain processes and behavior, while still shedding some light, at least indirectly, on the hard problem. It's more tractable than the hard problem, but solving it ought to shed light on the hard problem. And today I'm just going to kind of lay out the research program and talk about some ways in which it might potentially shed some light. And this is interesting to a philosopher because it looks like an instance of what people sometimes call genealogical analysis. It goes back to Friedrich Nietzsche on the genealogy of morals. Instead of thinking about what's good or bad, let's look at where our sense of good or bad came from, the genealogy of it all, in evolution or in culture or in religion. And people think a genealogical approach to God. Instead of thinking about does God exist or not, let's look at where our belief in God came from. Maybe there's some evolutionary reason for why people believe in God. It's often leads, not always, but often leads to a kind of debunking of our beliefs about those domains. Explain why we believe in God in evolutionary terms. No need for the God hypothesis anymore. Explain our moral beliefs in, say, evolutionary terms. Maybe no need to take morality quite so seriously. So some people, at least, are inclined to take an approach like this with consciousness too. If you think about the meta problem, explaining our beliefs about consciousness, that might ultimately debunk our beliefs about consciousness. This leads to a philosophical view, which has recently attracted a lot of interest. A philosophical view called illusionism, which is the view that consciousness itself is an illusion, or maybe that the problem of consciousness is an illusion. Explain the illusion, and we dissolve the problem. Now, I take it in terms of the meta problem, that view roughly comes to solve the meta problem, it will dissolve the hard problem. Explain why it is that we say all these things about consciousness. What we say, I am conscious. What we say, consciousness is puzzling. If you can explain all that in, say, algorithmic terms, then you'll remove the underlying problem, because you'll explain why we're puzzled in the first place. Actually, walking over here today, I noticed that just a couple of blocks away we have the Museum of Illusions. So I'm going to check that out later on. If illusionism is right, added to all those perceptual illusions is going to be the problem of consciousness itself. It's roughly an illusion thrown up by having a weird kind of self-model with a certain kind of algorithm that attributes to ourselves special properties that we don't have. So one line on the meta problem is the illusionist line. Solve the meta problem, you'll get to treat consciousness as an illusion. That's actually a view that has many antecedents in the history of philosophy one way or another. Even Immanuel Kant, in his great Critique of Pure Reason, had a section where he talked about the self, or the soul, as a transcendental illusion. We seem to have this indivisible soul, so that's the kind of illusion thrown up by our cognitive processes. The Australian philosophers, Alan Place and David Armstrong, had versions of this that I might touch on a bit later. Daniel Dennett, leading reductionist thinker about consciousness, has been pushing for the last couple of decades the idea that consciousness involves a certain kind of user illusion. And most recently, the British philosopher Keith Frankish has been really pushing illusionism as a theory of consciousness. Here's a book that's centering around a paper by Keith Frankish on illusionism as a theory of consciousness that I recommend to you. So one way to go with the meta problem is the direction of illusionism. But one nice thing about many people find illusionism completely unbelievable. They find, how could it be that consciousness is an illusion, but we just have these subjective experiences of data about our nature? And I confess I've got some sympathy with that reaction. So I'm not an illusionist myself. I'm a conclusion, I think that solving the meta problem does not dissolve the hard problem. But the nice thing about the meta problem is you can proceed on it to some extent at least in initial neutrality on that question. Is consciousness real or is it an illusion? It's a basic problem about our objective functioning in these reports. What explains those? To the neutral research program here that both realists, illusionists, people of all kinds of different views of consciousness can explain, and then we can come back and look at the philosophical consequences. Well, I'm not an illusionist. I think consciousness is real. I gotta say, I do feel the temptation of illusions. I find it a really intriguing and in some ways attractive view, which is fundamentally unbelievable. Nevertheless, I think that the meta problem should be a tractable problem. Solving it will shed much, at the very least, will shed much light on the hard problem of consciousness. Even if it doesn't solve it, if you can explain our conviction that we're conscious, somehow the source, the roots of our conviction that we're conscious must have something to do with consciousness, especially if consciousness is real. So I think it's very much a good research program for people to explain. So then I'll move on now to just outlining the research program a little bit more and talk a bit about potential solutions and on impact on theories of consciousness before wrapping up with just a little bit more about illusionism. So this meta problem, which I've been pushing recently, opens up a tractable empirical research program for everyone, reductionists, non-reductionists, illusionists, non-illusionists. We can try to solve it and then think about the philosophical consequences. What is the meta problem? Well, the way I'm going to put it is the problem of topic neutrally explaining problem intuitions, or else explaining why that can't be done. And I'll unpack that now. I'll unpack all the pieces of that right now, first starting with problem intuitions. What are problem intuitions? Well, those are, there are the things we say, there are things we think. I say, consciousness seems irreducible, and I think consciousness is irreducible. People might be disposed, have a tendency to say or think those things. Problem intuitions all take to be roughly that tendency. We have dispositions to say and think certain things about consciousness. What are the core problem intuitions? Well, I think they break down to a number of different kinds. There's the intuition that consciousness is non-physical. We might think of that as a metaphysical intuition about the nature of consciousness. There are intuitions about explanation. Consciousness is hard to explain. Explaining behavior doesn't explain consciousness. There are intuitions about knowledge of consciousness. Some of you may know the famous thought experiment of Mary in the black and white room, who knows all about the objective nature of color vision and so on, but still doesn't know what it's like to see red. She sees red for the first time, she learns something new. That's an intuition about knowledge of consciousness. There are what philosophers call modal intuitions about what's possible or imaginable. One famous case is the case of a zombie creature. To many people, so this is the philosophical zombie. Unlike the zombies in movies, which, have weird behaviors and go up the brains and so on, the philosophical zombie is a creature that seems, at least behaviorally, maybe physically, like a normal human, but doesn't have any conscious experiences or physical states, none of the mental states. And it seems to many people that's at least conceivable. We're not zombies. I don't think anyone here is a zombie, I hope. But nonetheless, it seems that we can make sense of the idea, and one way to pose the hard problem is why are we not zombies? So this imaginability of zombies is one of the intuitions that gets the problem going. And then you can go on and catalog more and more intuitions about the distribution of consciousness. Maybe the intuition that robots won't be conscious, that's an optional one, I think. Or consciousness matters morally in certain ways, and the list goes on. So I think there's an interdisciplinary research program here of working on those intuitions about consciousness and trying to explain them. Experimental psychology and experimental philosophy, a newly active area, can study people's intuitions about consciousness. We can work on models of these things, computational models, or neurobiological models of these intuitions and reports. And indeed, I think there's a lot of room for philosophical analysis. And it's just starting to be a program of people doing these things in all these fields. I mean, it is an empirical question how widely these intuitions are shared. You might be sitting there thinking, come on, I don't have any of these intuitions. Or maybe this is just you. I mean, my sense is from the psychological study to date, it seems that some of these intuitions about consciousness are at least very widely shared, at least as dispositions or intuitions, although they're often overridden on reflection. But the current data on this is somewhat limited. Although there is a lot of empirical work on intuitions about the mind, concerning things like belief, like when the kids get the idea that your beliefs about the world can be false, concerning the way yourself persists through time, could you exist after the death of your body? Where consciousness is concerned, there's work on the distribution of consciousness. Could a robot be conscious? Could a group be conscious? There's a book by Paul Bloom, Descartes' Baby, that catalogues a lot of this interesting work, making the case that many children are intuitive dualists, things they're naturally inclined to think there's something non-physical about the mind. So far, most of this work has not been so much on these core problem intuitions about consciousness, but we're developing this direction. Sarah Gottlieb and Tanya Lombroso have a very recent article called Can Science Explain the Human Mind on People's Judgments about when various mental phenomena are hard to explain, and they seem to find that subjective experience and things to which people have privileged first-person access seem to pose the problem big time. So at the beginning of a research program here, I think there's room for a lot more. The topic neutrality part, I say we're looking for a topic neutral explanation of problem intuitions. That's roughly to say an explanation that doesn't mention consciousness itself. It's put in neutral terms. It's neutral on the existence of consciousness. The most obvious one would be something like an algorithmic explanation. Like, here is the algorithm the brain is executing that generates our conviction that we're conscious and our reports about consciousness. There may be some time between that algorithm and consciousness, but to specify the algorithm, you don't need to make claims about consciousness. So the algorithmic version of the meta problem is roughly find the algorithm that generates our problem intuition. So that's, I think, a principle research program that maybe AI researchers in combination with, say, psychologists, the psychologists can help isolate data about the way that human beings are doing it, how these things are generated in humans, and the AI researchers can try and see about implementing that algorithm in machines and see what results. And I'll talk about a little bit of research in this direction in just a moment. But okay, now I want to say something about potential solutions to the problem. Like I say, this is a big research program. I don't claim to have the solution to the meta problem. I've got some ideas, but I'm not going to try and lay out a major solution. I'll just to hear a few things which I think might be parts of a solution to the problem, many of which have got antecedents here and there in scientific and philosophical discussion. Some promising ideas include retrospective models, phenomenal concepts, introspective opacity, and sense of acquaintance. Let me just say something about a few of these. And one starting idea that almost anyone's going to have here is somehow models of ourselves are playing a central role here. Human beings have models of the world, naive physics, naive psychology, models of other people, and so on. We also have models of ourselves. It makes sense for us to have models of ourselves and our own mental processes. It's something that the psychologist Michael Graziano has written a lot on. We have internal models of our own cognitive processes, including those tied to consciousness. And somehow something about our introspective models explains our sense, A, that we are conscious, and B, that this is distinctively problematic. And I think anyone thinking about the meta problem, this has got to be at least the first step. We have these introspective models. If you're an illusionist, they'll be false models. If you're a realist, they need to be false models. But at the very least, these introspective models are involved, which is fine. Okay, but the devil's in the details. How do they work to generate this problem? A number of philosophers have argued we have special concepts of consciousness, introspective concepts of these special subjective states. People call these phenomenal concepts of phenomenal consciousness. And one thing that's special is these concepts are somehow independent of our physical concepts. They explain, and we've got one set of physical concepts modeling the external world, well, we've got one set of introspective concepts for modeling our own mind, and these concepts, just by virtue of the way they're designed, are somewhat independent of each other, and that partly explains why consciousness seems to be independent of the physical world, intuitively. And so maybe that independence of phenomenal concepts could go some distance to explaining our problem report. So there's got to be something to this as well. At the same time, I don't think this goes nearly far enough, because we have concepts of many aspects of the mind, not just of the subjective experiential parts, but things we believe and things we desire. And so on, I believe that Paris is the capital of France. That's part of my internal self-model, but that doesn't seem to generate the hard problem in nearly the same way in which, say, the experience of red does. So a lot more needs to be said about what's going on in cases like having the experience of red and having the sense that that generates a gap, so it doesn't generalize to everything about the mind. Some people have thought that what we might call introspective opacity plays a role, but when we introspect what's going on in our minds, we don't have access to the underlying physical states. We don't see the neurons in our brains. We don't see that consciousness is physical, so we see it as non-physical. Most recently, the physicist Max Tegmark was arguing in this direction, saying somehow consciousness is substrate independent. We don't see the substrate, so then we think, maybe it can float free of the substrate. Armstrong made an analogy with the case of someone in a circus where the headless person illusion, where you don't see someone's there with a veil across their head. You don't see their head, so you see them as having no head. Here is a 19th century booth at a circus, the so-called headless woman, the veil over her head. You don't see the head, so somehow it looks, at least for a moment, like the person doesn't have a head. So Armstrong says maybe that's how it is with consciousness. You don't see it as physical, so you see it as non-physical. But still the question comes up, how do we make this inference? I mean, something special goes on in cases like, say, color and taste and so on. Color experience seems to attribute primitive properties to objects like redness, greenness, and so on. In fact, in the external world, at the very least, they have complex, reducible properties. Somehow our models of color treat colors of red and green as if they're primitive things. It turns out to be useful to have these models of things. We treat certain things as primitive, even though they're reducible. And it sure seems that when we experience colors, we experience greenness as a primitive quality, even though it may be a very, very complex, reducible property. That's something about our model of colors. The philosopher Wolfgang Schwartz tries to make an analogy with sensor variables in, say, image processing. You've got some visual sensors, a camera, or something, you need to process the image. Well, you've got some variables, some sensor variables to represent the sensory inputs the various sensors are getting. You might treat them as a primitive dimension because that's the most useful way to treat them. You don't treat them as certain amounts of light, so photons firing, you don't need to know about that. You use these sensor variables and treat them as a primitive dimension. And all that will play into a model of these things as primitive. Maybe taking that idea and extending it to introspection. Somehow these conscious states are somehow like sensor variables in our model of the mind. And somehow these internal models give us the sense of being acquainted with primitive concrete qualities and of our awareness of them. This is still just laying out, I don't think this is still yet actually explaining a whole lot, but it's laying out, it's narrowing down what it is that we need to explain to solve the meta problem. But just to put the pieces together, here's a little summary. One thing I like about this summary is you can read it in either an illusionist tone of voice as an account of the illusion of consciousness. Well, this is how our false introspective models work, or in a realist tone of voice as an account of our true, correct models of consciousness. But we can set it out in a way which is neutral on the two and then try and figure out later whether these models are correct, as the realist says, or incorrect, as the illusionist says. We have introspective models deploying introspective concepts of our internal states that are largely independent of our physical concepts. These concepts are introspectively opaque, not revealing any of the underlying mechanisms. Our perceptual models perceptually attribute primitive perceptual qualities to the world, and our introspective models attribute primitive mental relations to those qualities. These models produce the sense of acquaintance both with those qualities and with our awareness of those qualities. Like I said, this is not a solution to the meta problem, but it's trying at least to pin down some parts of the roots of the situation, to narrow down what needs to be explained. To go further, you want something to test these explanations, both with psychological studies to see if this is plausibly what's going on in humans, this is the kind of thing which is the basis of our intuitions, and computational models to see if, for example, we can program this kind of thing into an AI system and see if it can generate somehow qualitatively similar reports. And intuition, I think that last thing is a bit far-fetched right now, but I know of at least one instance of this research program which has been put into play by Luke Milhauser and Mark Schlageris, two researchers at Open Philanthropy, very interested in AI and consciousness. They actually they took some ideas about the meta problem from something I've written about it, and from something that the philosopher Francois Cameron had written about it. It's a couple of basic ideas about where problem intuitions might come from, and they tried to build them into a computational model. They built a little software agent which had certain axioms about colors and how they work, because it's red and it's green, and certain axioms about their own subjective experiences of colors, and then they combined it with a little theorem prover, and they saw what did this little software agent come up with? It came up with claims like, hey, well, my experiences of color are distinct from any physical state, and so on. I mean, okay, they kind of pick corners. This is not yet a truly convincing, sophisticated model of everything going on in the human mind, but it shows a little research program here of trying to find the algorithmic basis of these states. And I think as more sophisticated models develop, we might be able to use these to kind of provide a way in for AI researchers in thinking about this topic. Of course, there is the question, if we model all this stuff better and better in a machine, then is the machine actually going to be conscious, or is it just going to found self models that replicate what's going on in humans? So, some people have proposed an artificial consciousness test. Aaron Sloman, Susan Schneider, and Turner have suggested somehow that if a machine seems to be puzzled about consciousness in roughly the ways that we are, maybe that's actually a sign that it's conscious. So, if a machine actually looks to us as if it's puzzled by consciousness at a sign of consciousness, these people suggested as a kind of Turing test for machine consciousness. Find machines which are conscious like we are, because the opposing point of view is going to be no, the machine's not actually conscious. It's just like the machine